I found the message on my phone at 6:12 a.m., the blue glow sharp against the dark of my bedroom. And for a moment I thought I was still dreaming because it began with, "I can't keep lying to you." January felt like a lifetime ago. Yet there it was, December breathing down my neck, and the words landed like a dropped plate, too loud, too sudden, impossible to ignore. I sat up, heart racing, the quiet of the apartment thick with everything I'd tried not to name. I hadn't even opened the rest of the message before my chest tightened, because when someone says they can keep lying, it's never about something small. In January, I'd been looking for nothing and everything at once. The winter had pressed me into myself, a soft gray loneliness I pretended was peace. I scrolled late at night, half bored, half hopeful, and her profile stopped me without trying. No posed confidence, no clever slogans, just a candid smile that looked like it belonged to someone who laughed when they were nervous. I sent a message I didn't overthink, and she answered before I'd even set my phone down. We talked about ordinary things, weather, music that felt like confession, the way cities change when the leaves are gone, and by the end of the week I was checking my phone before my feet hit the floor. She lived 2 states away, close enough to imagine, far enough to stay safe. Or so I told myself. We found a rhythm that felt easy, like it had always existed. Morning hellos, midday thoughts, nights that stretched because neither of us wanted to be the one to say goodnight. We learned each other in pieces, the way you do when there's a screen between you and the risk feels filtered. She told me about her job, how she pretended it didn't matter more than it did. I told her about my mother's habit of calling at the wrong times, about how I loved my city but never quite belonged to it. When I admitted I'd never really been in love with a woman before, she paused just long enough to make me feel seen, then said she knew what it was like to stand on the edge of a truth and hesitate. By February, we had a shared language. A song meant good morning. A single dot meant stay with me. She sent me photos of her coffee mug chipped at the rim, the view from her fire escape at dusk. I sent her voice notes from my car, the traffic noise like a witness. We avoided labels not out of fear but out of reverence. It felt too fragile to name, too precious to risk by calling it anything but this. When she laughed, I laughed. When she went quiet, I waited. It was a careful dance, and I didn't realize how much I was giving away because it felt like I was choosing it. March brought the first crack, though I didn't see it that way then. She canceled a call we'd planned for days, said work had run late. Her apology was soft, sincere, and I accepted it easily, proud of myself for being understanding. The next night she made it up to me, stayed on until my phone battery begged for mercy. We talked about boundaries, about how we were both learning to ask for what we needed without apology. She told me she admired that I didn't pretend to be cooler than I was. I told her she made me braver. Neither of us said the word love, but it hung there anyway, like a secret neither wanted to break by speaking aloud. By April, our lives were threaded together in ways that surprised me. I'd see something and think of her first. A joke would land, and I'd save it for her. When my best friend asked who I was smiling at, I said a name without hesitation and felt my pulse spike. I'd never been good at hiding what mattered. She asked once what scared me most, and I told her the truth, that I was afraid of building something carefully only to have it collapse because I'd believed too much. She didn't rush to reassure me. She said she understood fear that came from hope. It made me trust her more than any promise could have. We talked about meeting, eventually. It was always someday, always when things settle. The idea hovered between us like a held breath. She sent me a photo of the street near her place, sunlight slanting through bare branches, and I imagined walking there with her, our shoulders brushing. I imagined silence that didn't need filling. When she said she liked the way I listened, that I made her feel unhurried, something in me softened that I hadn't known was hard. Summer blurred the edges. Heat made everything feel closer, more intense. We argued once, quietly, about something trivial, my delayed reply, her assumption, and it shook me more than it should have. We recovered, apologized, learned a little more about how easily words could bruise. She admitted she pulled back when she felt too much. I admitted I leaned in. We didn't frame it as a problem. She answered. She said it mattered. That she cared deeply. That she wasn't ready to define it because definitions made her feel trapped. I told her I didn't need a label. I meant it. I also felt something settle in my chest, heavy and unnamed. November was beautiful and brutal. We shared small victories, quiet disappointments. I told her about my family dinner, the way I'd almost mentioned her and stopped myself. She said she was sorry I felt like I had to hide. She didn't say she felt the same. I noticed. I swallowed it. We planned a December call, something longer, something intentional. She suggested it, and I felt a cautious hope spark back to life. Then December arrived with its sharp light and its endings. The call kept getting pushed. A meeting, a headache, a promise to reschedule. I stayed patient until patience started to feel like erasure. I drafted messages I didn't send. I told myself not to assume the worst. I remembered January, how easily she'd answered, how the connection had felt like oxygen. The message came before the call ever did. I sat there in the half-light, phone warm in my hand, and finally opened it. She wrote about caring for me, about how what we had was real to her. She wrote about circumstances, about timing, and then she wrote the thing that split me open. There was someone in her life she hadn't told me about, not new, not casual. Someone she'd been trying to leave but hadn't. Someone she loved in a way that made her afraid to choose. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me. She said she'd hoped she could figure it out before it mattered too much. I stared at the screen, the room suddenly too small. The year rewrote itself in my mind, every hesitation taking on a new shape. My hands shook, not with anger, but with the cold realization that I had been honest in a space where honesty hadn't been mutual. I typed and erased a dozen responses, each one inadequate. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on wet pavement, life moving forward without waiting for me to catch up. When I finally replied, my words were careful, restrained. I told her I needed to understand. I asked how long. I asked why she hadn't trusted me with the truth. The typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I waited, breath shallow, heart hammering, knowing that whatever came next would change everything we thought we were building, and that I was standing on the edge of an answer I wasn't sure I could survive. The dots vanished for a long time after my questions, long enough that my phone dimmed, and the room felt like it was holding its breath with me. When her reply finally came, it was measured, almost formal, as if she were choosing each word with gloves on. She said the other woman had been in her life for years, that it was complicated and quiet and hard to leave without detonating everything else. She said she hadn't known how to explain it without losing me, and the honesty of that admission landed like another betrayal. Wanting to keep me had cost me the truth. I read the message twice, 3 times, trying to absorb the shape of it without letting it crush me. I didn't respond right away. I put the phone face down on the bed and stood, pacing the narrow strip of carpet between my dresser and the window. My reflection in the glass looked older than it had in January, my face sharper, my eyes tired. I thought about all the nights I'd fallen asleep with my phone in my hand, all the moments I'd chosen trust over suspicion. None of it felt foolish until now. It felt human. I picked the phone back up and told her I needed space to think, that I wasn't angry but I was hurt, and that I didn't know what this meant yet. She replied almost instantly, saying she understood, that she was here when I was ready. The word here felt suddenly hollow. The days that followed stretched in strange ways. December moved on without waiting for my processing. Work emails piled up. My mother called and I let it ring. Friends texted and I answered with half-truths. I didn't tell anyone what had happened because saying it out loud felt like sealing it into permanence. At night, I replayed conversations, searching for signs I'd missed. I remembered the pauses, the careful wording, the way she'd sometimes go distant and then return warmer than before. It all rearranged itself into a pattern that made sense now, and that was almost worse than confusion. She didn't push during that space. She sent one message after 2 days, a simple check-in, no pressure. I appreciated that and resented it in equal measure. It made her feel considerate, which complicated my anger. On the 3rd day, I asked if we could talk. Not text, not write around each other. Talk. She agreed immediately, suggesting that evening. I spent the hours leading up to the call in a quiet panic, rehearsing what I might say and knowing none of it would come out the way I planned. When her face appeared on my screen, something in me softened against my will. She looked tired, hair pull. Ed back, eyes searching mine. We didn't rush into anything. We said hello like strangers who shared a history. The silence between us was heavy but not hostile. She apologized again, this time without explanations. I let it sit. I asked her to tell me everything, not defensively, not to justify herself, but because I needed the truth to decide what I could live with. She nodded, took a breath, and started. She talked about a relationship that had grown out of convenience and fear, about promises that felt binding even when love had changed shape. She admitted she'd met me at a time when she was already questioning her life, when my presence had felt like clarity and danger all at once. She said she hadn't planned to fall for me, but that she had, slowly, and that the guilt had been constant. I listened, my chest tight, my hands clenched in my lap. When she said she loved me, finally, explicitly, my breath caught. It was the first time either of us had said it. The timing was cruel. I asked her what she wanted now. The question hung there, simple and enormous. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me more than any answer could. She said she wanted time, that she was trying to figure out how to end things without hurting everyone involved. I felt something inside me go still. Time was what she'd been taking all year. I told her I couldn't be a secret or a possibility anymore. I told her I needed to know if she was choosing me or not. The firmness of my own voice surprised me. She didn't choose, not then. She said she wasn't ready to promise what she couldn't immediately deliver. I nodded, because I'd asked for honesty and she was giving it to me now, even if it was late. When the call ended, I sat there staring at my reflection in the black screen, feeling emptied out. Loving her hadn't been a mistake, but staying might be. We didn't cut each other off. Instead, we shifted into something tentative and undefined. We talked less, but when we did, it was raw. There was no pretending anymore. I told her when I felt jealous, when I felt small. She told me when she felt torn, when she felt like she was living two lives. It was an intimacy of a different kind, stripped of illusion. Some days it felt like progress. Other days it felt like prolonging the inevitable. Christmas came and went quietly. I spent it with friends, smiling through dinner, laughing at the right moments. She texted me that morning, wishing me peace. I wished her the same and meant it, even as something in me mourned the version of December I'd imagined with her. At night, alone again, I admitted to myself that I was still in love with her, that knowing the truth hadn't changed that. It had only made the love heavier, more complicated to carry. In January's echo, the year turned. I tried to reclaim parts of myself that had gone quiet. I started running again early mornings when the city was still asleep. I filled my calendar with plans I didn't cancel. I told myself I was choosing me, even as my thoughts kept circling back to her. She noticed the change. She told me she admired it. I didn't know how to receive that without feeling like I was performing resilience for her benefit. Then, unexpectedly, she told me she'd told the other woman about me. Not everything, but enough. It had been messy. There had been tears. The admission sent a shock through me, a mix of relief and dread. I asked what that meant for us. She said she didn't know yet, that things were shifting in ways she couldn't predict. I felt the old hope stir, dangerous and familiar. I tried to temper it, reminding myself of the cost. We talked late one night, voices low, sharing memories from the year as if we were cataloging something fragile. She laughed about a joke from February. I teased her about her stubbornness. For a moment it felt like before, like the easy closeness that had drawn me in. Then she grew quiet. She said she was afraid I would walk away before she could fix things. I told her I was afraid of staying and losing myself. The honesty sat between us, stark and unresolved. February approached, bringing with it the anniversary of our first message. She mentioned it casually, then apologized for bringing it up. I told her it mattered to me, that pretending it didn't would be another kind of lie. We talked about meeting again, this time not as someday but as a possibility. The idea scared me more than it thrilled me. Seeing her would make everything real in a way distance had softened. It would force a reckoning. Neither of us could text our way around. One evening, she told me she'd made a decision she needed to tell me in person. The words sent a jolt through me. I asked what kind of decision. She said it wasn't fair to say more over the phone. My heart pounded, my mind racing through possibilities. Was she leaving the other woman? Was she choosing to stay? Was this a goodbye dressed up as consideration? I agreed to meet her, naming a city halfway between us, a weekend in March. After we hung up, I sat with the weight of it. The future suddenly narrowed to a date on the calendar. I didn't know if I was walking toward an ending or a beginning, only that whatever she was going to say would demand something from me. As I stared at the glowing screen, the year folding in on itself, I realized that loving her had already changed me irrevocably, and that the next chapter would ask me to decide how much more I was willing to risk. The city we chose was neutral ground, a place neither of us could claim as familiar, and in the weeks leading up to March it took on an almost mythic quality in my mind. I imagined the streets, the cafe where we'd agreed to meet, the sound of her voice, not compressed through a speaker. I tried not to build expectations, but anticipation has a way of filling space when you're not looking. As the date approached, my emotions didn't settle into clarity the way I'd hoped. Instead, they layered, hope on top of fear, resolve on top of longing, until I felt like I was carrying a version of myself I didn't recognize. The morning I left, the air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that makes you feel awake whether you want to or not. I packed lightly, as if traveling with fewer things might make the outcome lighter too. On the train, I watched the landscape slide by, towns blurring into one another, and thought about January again, about how simple everything had been when we were just two names on a screen. I wondered if we'd been kinder to each other then because we hadn't yet learned how much power we held. She texted when she arrived in the city, a brief message telling me she was there, that she hoped I'd had a safe trip. I replied in kind, my fingers steady even, as my pulse wasn't. We didn't say anything more. It felt right to save the words for when they could land fully, without delay or interpretation. By the time I checked into my hotel, the room felt like a temporary holding space, neutral and quiet, a place to steady myself before whatever came next. When I walked into the cafe the next afternoon, I spotted her immediately. She was seated near the window, hands wrapped around a mug, shoulders slightly hunched as if bracing against something unseen. For a second, I just stood there, watching her in a way I never had before. She was real in a way that startled me, her presence heavier and more delicate than any image I'd held. When she looked up and saw me, her face shifted, surprise, relief, something like fear, and she stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. We didn't hug, not at first. We hovered in that awkward space where intimacy and uncertainty collide, then settled into seats across from each other. Up close, I noticed details I'd never seen through a screen. A faint line near her mouth, the way her eyes softened when she smiled despite herself. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said yet. She started talking before I could ask anything, as if afraid she'd lose the nerve if she waited. She told me she was glad I came. She told me she'd been terrified I wouldn't. I listened, nodding, my hands folded tightly in my lap. When she finally paused, I asked her why she'd wanted to tell me her decision in person. She took a breath, looked out the window, then back at me. She said she had ended things with the other woman. The words landed softly, without fanfare, and for a moment I didn't know how to react. Relief flickered, followed quickly by caution. I asked when. She said recently that it had been one of the hardest conversations of her life, that there had been anger and grief and a sense of failure she was still trying to process. I believed her. I could see the aftermath, in her posture, in the careful way she spoke. I told her I was sorry she'd gone through that. The sincerity in my voice surprised me. She reached across the table then, stopping just short of touching my hand. The restraint felt intentional, respectful. She said she wasn't asking me to fix anything for her, that she knew trust couldn't be rebuilt by declarations alone. She said she wanted to try, slowly, honestly, if I was willing. The cafe noise faded into the background as I weighed her words. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it, for her to choose? And yet the choosing didn't erase the year that had come before it. I told her I needed to understand what had changed besides circumstance. I needed to know why now, and how she planned to be different. She didn't get defensive. She said she'd spent months trying to avoid discomfort, and that losing me had finally made her confront the cost of that avoidance. She said she was learning how to sit with uncertainty instead of hiding from it. I watched her as she spoke, searching for something false, something rehearsed. What I found instead was vulnerability that felt unpolished and real. We walked after that, leaving the cafe behind. The city was unfamiliar but alive, streets humming with people who had nothing to do with us. Side by side, we fell into an easy rhythm, conversation flowing and stalling naturally. At one point, she laughed at something I said and reached out, her hand brushing my arm. The contact sent a jolt through me, electric and grounding all at once. She noticed my intake of breath, her smile fading into something more serious. I told her I was scared. She said she was too. The admission felt like a bridge. We stopped near a small park, the last of winter clinging stubbornly to the trees. She asked me what I needed if we were going to move forward. The question felt monumental. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told her I needed transparency, even when it was uncomfortable. I told her I needed to feel chosen not just in words but in actions. I told her I couldn't do another year of half steps. She listened without interrupting, her attention focused and steady. She asked me what I wanted. The simplicity of it caught me off guard. I wanted to say her. I wanted to say us. Instead, I said I wanted something that didn't make me doubt my worth. She nodded, eyes shining, and said she wanted to give me that. We stood there, the space between us charged but restrained, neither of us crossing it yet. That evening, we shared a quiet dinner, the kind where conversation dips into comfortable silence. There were moments when it felt almost normal, almost easy, and moments when the weight of our history pressed in. She told me about the fallout she was dealing with, the way mutual friends were taking sides. I told her about the changes I'd made, the boundaries I'd learned to name. We were careful with each other, not fragile but attentive, as if aware that any careless movement could undo something tentative and new. When it was time to part ways for the night, we lingered on the sidewalk outside my hotel. The air had softened, the cold less biting. She looked at me like she wanted to say something else, something she wasn't sure she had the right to voice. I waited. She said she didn't expect anything from me tonight, that she wanted me to have space to feel whatever I felt. The respect in that offer loosened something in my chest. I surprised myself by stepping closer, not into her arms but near enough that the space between us felt intentional rather than protective. I told her I appreciated that she'd come, that she'd told me the truth even when it risked losing me. I told her I wasn't ready to promise anything but that I was open to seeing where honesty might lead us. Her relief was visible, a soft exhale she didn't try to hide. We didn't kiss. We didn't touch beyond a brief, careful hug that felt like an agreement rather than a conclusion. When I went inside, I stood by the window and watched her walk away, her figure blending into the evening crowd. My phone buzzed moments later with a message from her, thanking me for giving her the chance to be better. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Lying in bed that night, sleep elusive, I realized that meeting her hadn't brought the clarity I'd imagined. Instead, it had deepened the questions. Loving her was still possible. Trusting her felt like a choice I would have to make again and again, deliberately, without guarantees. As the city lights flickered outside my window, I understood that whatever came next would require me to decide not just whether I believed in her, but whether I believed I deserved the kind of love I'd been asking for all along. I woke before dawn, the unfamiliar city still dark, my mind replaying the previous day in fragments that felt more vivid than dreams. There was no dramatic sense of closure waiting for me, no sudden certainty. Instead, there was a quiet awareness that whatever decision I made wouldn't be about a single moment, but about how I chose to live with myself afterward. I lay there for a long time, listening to the hum of traffic far below, and let myself feel everything without trying to organize it into an answer. We met again that morning, not because we'd planned it, but because neither of us was ready to leave the city pretending the conversation was finished. We walked without a destination, coffee warming our hands, the sky slowly lightening above us. The city felt gentler in the morning, less crowded, like it was giving us room. We talked about ordinary things at first, almost as a way to test whether ordinary still existed between us. It did, and that realization brought a fragile comfort. Eventually, the conversation circled back to what mattered, not with urgency, but with inevitability. She told me more about the ending she was living through, how grief didn't disappear just because. A decision had been made. She admitted she was afraid that even after choosing me, she might not know how to show up the way I deserved. The honesty in that confession hit deeper than any promise. I told her I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for consistency. I was looking for someone who didn't disappear when things got hard. We stopped near the river, the water moving steadily, indifferent to our hesitation. She asked me if I thought I could ever fully trust her again. The question wasn't defensive or pleading. It was careful, almost brave. I didn't answer right away. I watched the water and thought about the year behind us, about how trust hadn't broken all at once but had thinned quietly, stretched by omissions. I told her trust wasn't a switch. It was something rebuilt through choices made repeatedly, especially when no one was watching. I told her I didn't know yet if we would get there, but that I could imagine a path. She nodded, absorbing that without trying to rush me. Then she said something that shifted the ground beneath us. She said that if staying in my life meant accepting that I might eventually decide she wasn't enough for me, she was still willing to try. That she would rather risk losing me honestly than keep me through half-truths. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They weren't about possession or reassurance. They were about agency, mine as much as hers. I realized then that the power dynamic between us had changed. For so long, I had been the one waiting, accommodating, hoping. Now she was the one standing in uncertainty, knowing the outcome wasn't hers to control. That shift didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel responsible. I had to be careful not to let past hurt turn into quiet punishment. We spent the rest of the day together, without trying to define what we were doing. We shared a late lunch, wandered into a bookstore, commented on strangers' dogs like people who had always known each other. There were moments when my guard slipped and laughter came easily, surprising us both. There were moments when sadness rose unexpectedly, reminding me that forgiveness didn't erase memory. She didn't ask me to forget. That mattered. In the late afternoon, sitting on a bench as the city grew louder again, I finally said the thing I'd been holding back. I told her I was willing to try, but only if we started from where we truly were, not where we wished we'd been. No pretending the year hadn't happened, no rushing toward a future to escape the discomfort of the present. I told her I needed time that was real, not conditional. Time that didn't depend on secrecy or divided loyalties. I told her I needed her to choose me publicly, not dramatically, but consistently. She listened, eyes steady, and said yes without qualifying it. Not yes as a guarantee, but yes as a commitment to show up. She said she would let me see her life as it actually was, not the curated version she'd shared before. She said she understood if I walked away later, but that she wouldn't hold that fear against me. Something in her tone made me believe her. When it was time to leave, there was no sharp break. We hugged longer this time, not desperate, not clinging, but grounding. Her arms around me felt familiar and new all at once. When we pulled back, she rested her forehead briefly against mine, a quiet intimacy that didn't demand more. We exchanged a look that held everything unresolved and everything possible, then went our separate ways. The weeks that followed were different in ways that were subtle but undeniable. There were no dramatic declarations, no sudden escalation. Instead, there was steadiness. She told me where she was, who she was with, without being asked. She didn't disappear during hard days. When I voiced insecurity, she didn't dismiss it or try to smooth it over. She stayed present. I noticed myself relaxing in small increments, the constant vigilance easing into something like true. In progress. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, when my instinct was to pull back before I could be hurt again. When that happened, I named it. She met it without defensiveness. We learned how to argue without erasing each other, how to pause instead of retreat. It wasn't romantic in the cinematic sense, but it was deeply intimate. It felt like building something that could hold weight. By December, the month that had once felt like an ending, I noticed how different my body felt in her presence. Less braced, less afraid. I still remember January clearly, the innocence of it, the way I'd fallen without knowing what I was risking. But now loving her was a choice made with eyes open. I didn't feel smaller for it. I felt more myself. One night, nearly a year after that first message, we sat on a call that stretched late, not because we were afraid to hang up, but because we were comfortable. She told me she loved me, not carefully, not hesitantly, but with a steadiness that felt earned. I said it back without fear. The words didn't feel like a leap. They felt like arrival. I don't believe in perfect timing anymore. I believe in people who are willing to face themselves, and in the courage it takes to stay when leaving would be easier. I met her online in January, and I still loved her in December, but the love that survived wasn't the one that started. It was deeper, quieter, and stronger for having been tested. If you stayed with this story, thank you, and if you want to hear more like it, you're always welcome to stay a little longer.